Hey BookTube, I'm the Book Mage, welcome back to my channel. Let me take this down. So I know I'm filming in a bit of a weird place. If you've been keeping up with my vlogs, you kind of know what's going on. But either way, welcome to my November wrap-up, in which I read, I think actually 8 books. I've been extremely busy, and yet somehow I think I've had my best reading month of the year in terms of like books and page count. I don't know how that works out. I don't understand the maths on that one. But yeah, I have read 8 books this month, and let me tell you all about them. So the first book that I read in November was only very short, and it was the Loki Variations, The Man, the Myth, the Mischief, and this is by Carl Johnson. Now I picked this up kind of on a whim along with another like D&D themed book. This is just like a really tiny cute little book of information. They all have different authors, and this one is just kind of looking at the way that the mythological figure has been adapted over time, like through pop culture. So it does focus a lot on Marvel, because I think that's like obviously the most prevalent, I think, of the more modern interpretations, but it does go into look at a few like other authors, other sources, like a few other like TV shows and movies and things that are not Marvel connected in any way. And I thought it was like an interesting sort of kind of shallow, but just like for the tidbits it provides, it was an interesting quick little read. And for the most part I read this while I was waiting for one of the season 2 Loki episodes to finally drop. So as is non-fiction, I didn't really rate it. I have no idea how I would rate non-fiction, to be honest, but it is one that I would recommend. Honestly, it's so short, and for the information it puts in there, while it doesn't really go very in-depth, it was still like interesting as a surface level, like skim over look at this topic. The next book that I read was Every Sky a Grave by J. Posey. Now this is a sci-fi that came onto my TBR really recently, and I was just so hyped to read this, so excited. I will say I feel like my excitement was slightly misplaced, although I did still enjoy this. So this is a sci-fi in which there's essentially kind of like several different ancient orders that all sort of work together, and one of them basically gives members of its order the ability to have, we'll say, very powerful semi-magical abilities via the use of a language. And in this universe, the like old language, the deep language, is kind of this underlying force that sort of exists within like every aspect of the universe and existence. And so one such use of this language is the ability to literally end a planet, like destroy planets. And that has been the main character's mission. So she has the power to go to a world, and if she decides that it is corrupt enough, she can speak certain words in this ancient magical language, and the planet will start to wither and die. And that sounded like a really interesting concept to me. So at the start of this, you're basically seeing her being sent out on another mission to sort of investigate the spread of this, I guess you would call it like a deviation from this order's expected plan for this particular planet. So the main character Edith is sent there to sort of investigate, send back information, and if necessary, she will be asked to destroy this world and destroy this planet. But while she's there, you kind of get the feeling quite early on that there's much more going on than you first think. So I had thought that this would be maybe a bit more linguistic, and that aspect doesn't really come into it, but I am really glad that I read this because it turned out to still be quite an interesting, engaging read. I think it is sort of equal parts character driven and action driven. A lot of this is Edith sort of trekking across the wilderness of a planet, and oftentimes she's being pursued. While there aren't always like massive action scenes, there is still quite a level of tension. There's kind of like a constant need to keep moving and keep acting, and Edith is a very active character. So I think this is the kind of thing that you can pick up and definitely not get bored with. I will say as well, for a sci-fi, it is quite simplistic, but I don't think that works against it. It is telling quite a simple, straightforward sort of story. It's not like massive multi-perspective, like grand sci-fi space opera type thing. It's very rooted in it's fairly realistic in the way that it handles things. And I will say, although it did take quite a while for me to get to a certain point, eventually there is this sort of level of, I don't want to say camaraderie, but there is a relationship built up between two characters in this over quite a long period of time, and by the end of the book I was very captivated by it. I was very interested and invested by it, and this is a book where I am definitely intending to go on and read book 2. I think this is just a duology, but I definitely want to read book 2, mainly because I want to see what happens to the characters, like what happens to their relationship, like the way that they interact, their sort of dialogue, their back and forth, their interactions that were like eventually the highlight of this novel for me. So I think I gave this a 4 stars overall. I'm definitely going to go on and read the sequel, and I've never really heard anybody talk about this. So if you're looking for, I guess, it's very well paced. If you get through like maybe like the first 2 chapters, the pacing is like so steady and engaging throughout. It has really good characters like once you get to know them, and the stakes are high, but you're seeing them from the perspective of the main character, so it all feels very personal, and I really, really like this one. So yeah, a 4-star read for me, definitely going to read the sequel, and one that I would recommend if you just want like a fairly, it's not even that long, fairly easygoing, engaging, well-paced sci-fi read. I've just realised I have places to put things behind me. And I will say, I was also doing Books to Ashes, Library of Dragons readathon throughout November, because like, if November wasn't busy enough for me, I just had to make it harder by adding in readathon prompts. So I will get back to that book, but I did need to say that to preface why I read this next book. So as part of Ash's readathon, you had to read a book with a dragon in it, and me being me, I chose Beowulf. Specifically, this is Beowulf as translated by Tolkien, and the reason I went for this specific translation, I'm so sorry if everyone's like clicking off in boredom and skipping forwards, I don't blame you, but the reason I chose specifically this translation over any others was because I had heard that Tolkien writes in the same way that he does with like the Lord of the Rings. He maintains this quite archaic feeling lexis. He's maintained the feeling of this being like an ancient poem, right? Whereas a lot of other translators will try and make it much more accessible to like a first-time reader or to a modern audience, and so they will either make it slightly less poetic or they'll make it much more simplified or easily digestible. I didn't want that for myself. I want this to feel like an ancient poem. The first this far of the book is the actual translation of Beowulf, and then all of this bit, all of this is like Tolkien's writing on the topic of like his translation and Beowulf. It's basically like a series of academic feeling text on the matter, and I did feel like this was really engaging and really informative. Like, it goes through and it pulls out like excerpts like while it's discussing certain aspects of the poem, and I really, really liked the way that this was translated. I really liked the linguistic choices in this. So if you are looking for like, I don't know, a much more, I want to say atmospheric, but the vibes were great. Maybe I can say that about it. So again, I didn't really rate this one because it's a translation of an ancient poem, and there's many translations, and then it's essays, and then it's like, I don't really know how to rate this. What I will say is I read this book, Tolkien's translation, and I also listened to a different modern translation, like audio version of Beowulf, and then also there was like, it is such an old recording, I think it's from like the 60s or the 70s, there is a recording of somebody speaking it in like the original Old English. So I'm counting this as one book, but like, do I count this as 3 books? That would have made 10 books in November, but I'm not counting the audio. I'm counting both of those audiobooks, those audio readings, as supplementary to this book. So would you count that as 3 books, or would you just count it as 1? I'm counting it as 1. But anyway, yeah, so the main reason I picked this up this month, and I was real dumb about this, but I needed to read a book with a dragon in it, and Beowulf obviously has a dragon in it, and this book for the Library of Dragons readathon essentially told you what colour your dragon would be. So you can pick like any of the colours on the book. So I went with the black and grey on the spine, and I wanted to have like teal accents to match like this teal colour. And as for the dragon's type, your dragon's like elemental power, like elemental ability, was decided by the genre of one of the books that you read. And for that I used Every Sky a Grave. So my dragon's element from the science fiction genre is a celestial / cosmos dragon, which is a dragon made of constellations and stars. So this could be like an eldritch abomination, or it could be like a cute little celestial dragon. And as much as like the goth side in me is tempted to go like full Lovecraftian abomination, I think I'm gonna go for like a cute little, like, my black dragon can have like little teal stars and sparkles, maybe like a little bit ethereal. That's what I'm feeling anyway. So far, a celestial black, grey and teal dragon. I'm having so much fun with this so far. Then we come to the part of the month that was the hardest, and if you've seen like my most recent reading vlog, I read Iron Flame. And this is like 620 something pages. Somehow in this month I read Iron Flame. So this is the continuation to Fourth Wing, and I read this because my friend, her favourite book of like the last year and one of her favourite books ever is Fourth Wing, and she was desperate to read the sequel, and I kind of said I would buddy read it with her. So pretty much like 2 days after this came out, I started reading this. Did I regret it immediately? Yes. But did I power through and finish it? Also yes. And if you would like to see my immediate live reactions, I do post all of those to like my bookish Instagram. They are full of spoilers, and you kind of have to like have read the book, or at least like read the text in the image to like understand. But basically I'm taking pictures of the book and bitching over the top of it. So if you think you'd be amused by that, I will link my Instagram in the description. Needless to say, I can't really say much about this because it is a sequel, and obviously I don't want to give you guys spoilers because because I know that this series is quite popular. However, oh, I hated this so much. I feel like I have to give this like a straight 2 stars. I reserve a 1 star for something that like I genuinely am like really aggravated by, like really offended by, and this wasn't that bad, but it was bad. And I feel like anything that was you maybe thought was good about Fourth Wing, pacing, engagement, spice, anything that like you personally might have liked, I feel like was just absolute, just a train wreck in this book. The world building, the fantasy aspects of this book are played up so much more. Like the font is much smaller as well. I feel like Rebecca Yarros is trying to go like full fantasy with this, the same way that Sarah J Maas did like 3 or 4 books into the Throne of Glass series. It just does not work here. She just does not have the experience or understanding of like why certain things she's doing work in fantasy, and so much of this is genuinely so laughable and cringe. If you've not seen the vlog, basically I had like my head in my hands. The last line of this book is one of the worst things I've ever read in any book ever. It felt like a joke. It was bad. It was really, really bad. And unfortunately my friend does actually want me to go on and read like the whole rest of the series with her, which I think is like 3 more books. Oh my god. No. I mean, I probably will because she's my friend and like she's asking me to. So depending on whether or not people want to see that, I might potentially post updates here, but I'm not looking forward to it. I feel like this has been rushed in order to make a profit. Like, I assume this has been rushed to get it out in time for Christmas, in time for the holidays, as soon as possible, before like the TikTok hype dies down and like people forget about this book and this series. My takeaway is that it's poorly written, it's incredibly boring, I have no idea where it's going, and I feel like she's just sort of making it up randomly as she goes along, thinking like, oh, what's the most random thing I can do at this point, and just like shoving it in. So I'm not having a great time with it, I'll be totally honest. I think this was like my worst book of the month. And somehow the biggest book. From that, I didn't really give myself much more hope for November. I did recently kind of a bit of an experiment where I looked at all like the YA books on my shelves and I chose 4 of them, particularly 4 that I thought were either like the most hyped up by BookTube or the ones that I thought I would personally have like the most chance of enjoying, the ones that appealed to me and the things that I like in books the most, with the intention of seeing whether I actually still like YA literature. Can I still read books written for a teenage audience? So I did try and go in with an open mind. And the first book that I picked up for that was The Luminaries by Susan Dennard. So this one is a low fantasy and it's set, I think it's America, it could be Canada, but it's set in like this small little town in definitely North America. And you are following a girl whose name is Winnie Wednesday, and she lives in this place called Hemlock Falls, which is part of this like hunter society. Like, these people hunt monsters for a living. They're basically kind of like monster slayers, and everyone in this society is kind of like part of this like monster slayer culture, whether they actually hunt the monsters or not. Winnie's family has been outcast for like the past maybe like decade-ish, and it's because many years ago, like before the start of the novel, her father, if magic is kind of like evil and forbidden in this world, and her father was basically discovered to be like a magic user, he disappeared, but as a result her entire family were like excommunicated from this like monster slayer, monster hunter society, and they've been living as like outcasts, social pariahs ever since. And what is happening is on Winnie's, I think it's her 15th or her 16th birthday, she is given the opportunity to enter these hunter trials, and if she can pass all of these trials she will be appointed a hunter, and that means that her family will be like accepted back into society again. I feel like I just have to get it off of my chest. I think I gave this like a 2 point something. It was not great. The pacing was incredibly slow. I found this like such a drag. This is a lovely edition, like it has illustrations and everything. The premise was fantastic. The premise, I really like the idea, and I really like the magical mystical creatures portrayed in this, so I like the setup. I think part of my issue is with this being YA, so much of it was so obvious. Part of the mystery in this is you're trying to figure out like, oh, who is this werewolf that people think they keep seeing? And I will say I knew who it was before I picked the book up because of the way that books and book tropes work, but even if I hadn't known that, the second the character steps onto the page there's like a massive red flag where it's very obvious that that character is clearly the werewolf. There's like a dead giveaway. Like, if I was like a forensic investigator, I would be like, excuse you, I know you were at the scene of the crime. Something that I thought by the end of the book would be, even though I would get no catharsis from it, like I would get no satisfaction from that reveal, because I knew it before going into the book, but definitely the first time it was mentioned was like, yeah, I'm totally right. It doesn't even happen by the end of the book. The reveal must be in book 2, because you don't even get the payoff for things that are set up in this book in this book. There are hints dropped about people that may or may not be using magic, and again, before we'd even met the character, there was like another throwaway line about them, and I'm like, oh, this person, who you must think is a good guy, is very clearly using magic. I don't know whether they're good or evil or what, I'm assuming bad, but like, I know they're a magic user, and it's not brought up in this book, it's not revealed in this book, the character doesn't even know that's going on, and I'm like, well, there are so many things that I could clearly pick up on that I thought would be addressed in this book, and the ending doesn't cover any of it, so it felt so lackluster. Like, I didn't even get the payoff for things that I was like foreseeing were going to happen. So unfortunately I did not really enjoy this. I thought it was very nicely atmospheric. I liked the vibe. I know my friend really liked this one, but for me personally, on like an enjoyment level, it just wasn't it, and I will not be continuing with the sequel. I do not need that tedium in my life. After that, I picked up a book that I think has been hyped on BookTube for quite a while. I know a lot of people really like this book, and it is Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson. The premise is that you are following Elizabeth, the main character, and she has grown up in this library, and in this world, libraries are these sort of self-contained places that they house all these magical grimoires, which in this world, a grimoire is specifically a book that is like, they're all sentient, they're all magic, they hold magical knowledge, but the books themselves are basically alive, and if something goes wrong with the book, if it's particularly powerful enough and magical enough, it can basically transform into kind of like this horrible, grotesque, demonesque type monster. So when Elizabeth's library is attacked and like a book is stolen and is transfigured into this basically a monster, Elizabeth is implicated in the crime and is kind of having to leave the library for the first time in order to prove her innocence. She's basically taken away by a sorcerer. His name is Nathaniel. He's kind of like a snarky sad boy, you know, the type that BookTube like. And he also has a manservant called Silas, and I don't want to go further than that into the plot. That's just kind of like the opening and like what's in the synopsis. Having read that synopsis, I was kind of like, okay, it's like it's got magical libraries, magical books, demons exist in this world, and I was just so ready for this to be like a new favourite. Like, I had such high hopes for this. Unfortunately for me, this just fell so flat. And if you've seen the vlog, like, I do think it was me. I do think I was the issue here, because this book on paper has like everything that I should really enjoy in a fantasy novel. Short of maybe like one vampire and one dragon, this has like everything that I could possibly wish for in a book, and yet something about this I just found really not engaging. Like, my brain just didn't get into it. I just didn't get into like the swing and the pace of the writing. I thought maybe the pacing was a little bit janky, especially at the beginning, and sometimes I was just thinking, can we just like get on with the story, you know, can we just like get past this? So while I really did like the atmosphere, I loved the setting, I loved like the general premise and like the way that like books and magic and stuff and demons even are done in this world, I did really like the execution of this book. It's just something about it just didn't really connect with me, and I do think it is because it's a YA. Like, if this had been an adult book, could have been like an all-time favourite. I'm begging somebody to like basically rewrite something very similar to this but as an adult book. The characters especially I really enjoyed. Elizabeth is fine as a protagonist. There were moments where like she was quite endearing. I will say that Silas and Nathaniel, I totally see why like the BookTube girlies like them. Very like as character archetypes, as like a love interest, that sort of thing. I really enjoy that kind of character, that kind of archetype. So again, I was really gutted when I just didn't find myself getting into it, and like I was really trying, and it's not that I can find anything wrong with this book, it's just that what everyone else is getting out of it, like I'm trying so hard, I'm just not getting it. So unfortunately, I think I gave this like a 3 stars pretty much. My enjoyment of this book was actually less than a 3 stars, but objectively, because I do know that it is like, there's nothing wrong with this book, it doesn't deserve less than a 3 stars, so I have bumped it up. But my experience reading this was just one where I didn't want to pick it up, I just kind of wanted to put it down, I wanted to read something else. I wasn't reaching for it, I wasn't like engaged with it or thinking about it, and that's sad, because like this had so much potential for me, and I kind of have to conclude that the issue is me and not this book. So if you like YA, I would highly recommend this, unless you're me, in which case this was a disappointment. From there, I ended up moving on to like a surprise win, very unexpected, and that was the Guinevere Deception by Kirsten White. Now, this is the first in a YA fantasy Arthurian retelling, and the twist in this one is that when Guinevere, who is the main protagonist, when she is sent off to marry Arthur, it's actually not Guinevere. The real Guinevere is dead, and this new imposter Guinevere is a changeling who has been sent by Merlin, and she's basically been sent to protect Arthur from like this magical threat. She doesn't know what it is yet, and so that's what she is doing. And in order to do that, they've had this marriage, and she's now Queen of Camelot and attempting to defend it from within. So I picked this up not really having any sort of expectations for it. I was thinking like, oh, it's just like a YA Arthurian retelling. As it turns out, I feel like what this book had going for it was the fact that it was a retelling of something that I was already familiar with and already enjoyed. Because anywhere where I thought that maybe if I'd read this not knowing anything about Camelot, maybe I would have thought there was a slight lack in characterization somewhere, or maybe there weren't enough descriptions of like Camelot or the environment or like the social hierarchy or anything like that. But because I have that pre-existing knowledge, my brain just kind of filled it in, and so I didn't really feel like I was missing it because I wasn't questioning things, I wasn't confused by things. So my personal experience reading this was one of just pure ease going through it. I enjoyed this, I was engaged with this, like I really liked the characters and the way that they're done in this book, and I even said in my vlog that I might actually decide to go on and read the sequels to this, because if they're anything like this, like they're very short, they're very fast-paced, and I liked this enough to the point where I feel like I would enjoy finishing these sequels if I'm getting rid of like most of the YA on my shelves, because I'm probably going to pick it up thinking, yeah, I don't want to read this anymore, I'm going to DNF it. But it might be nice to have something like this which would act as like a palette cleanser, something that I know I'm more likely to enjoy because I really enjoyed book one. So I actually gave this like, I think like a 3.25. I genuinely really did enjoy this, and I was shocked. I think the highlights for me, probably again, the characterization. I really like the way that Guinevere is done in this. I like her relationships with the women around her. I like the way that magic is done through knotwork primarily in this. Honestly, I was glad to just have something that I enjoyed. And while I don't think it's for everyone, because I know that a lot of people who did read this, who do normally read YA, I think were like underwhelmed by it, I think maybe my expectations had just been so low that I was just pleasantly surprised. So I'm calling it a win. And finally, the last book that I read in November was The Coldest Girl in Coldtown by Holly Black. So this is set in a world where vampires and like this vampire disease, I guess, has spread kind of across like all of the modern world. The way that vampires exist is the whole world knows that vampires exist, and if a vampire bites you, you're not guaranteed to turn into a vampire, but you will get this infection, and they call it being cold, and you will essentially be in like the larval stage almost of being a vampire. You will get this incredible need for blood, this horrible bloodlust, and if you then go on to drink blood, you will then become a vampire. So in order to kind of like curb this spread of the infection, vampires are all isolated to these things called cold towns. They're basically like big quarantine zones, as is anyone who is either cold or like thought to be cold and therefore like infected with this vampirism, this vampire virus. So you're following a girl called Tanner who has attended like this teenage house party like with her friends, and she wakes up in the morning and it's evident there's been this horrible vampire massacre. Everyone there is dead, and so through various circumstances Tanner finds herself on the way to one of these cold towns. I thought that the setup, like the premise for this and the atmosphere was very good. They were kind of like some of the highlights, and I think I quite liked the characterization of like one or two of the vampires in here. I will say, with everyone being like 15, 16 years old in this, so many of the side characters were just not my thing, not my vibe. I feel like if I had read this at like 11, 12 years old, I would have loved this. And the atmosphere of this was quite good. It wasn't afraid to occasionally be a bit gory or like a little bit explicit maybe. I do feel again if this had been an adult book and it had gone further with all of that and like been able to explore more adult topics, then I feel like I would have enjoyed it more. As it was, I feel like the characters in this did just read really young, and like a lot of their goals, motivations, their reasoning is like reading it as an adult, I'm like, children, please. So ultimately, I think I maybe give this like a 3 stars, but again, it was another one that I found really underwhelming. I feel like at the end of this, you can just like, if you've not seen the video, you can kind of tell at this point that I'm not having the best time with YA, and usually it is the conventions of its like age category that I feel personally is like holding it back. With this, I do feel like there's a lot to enjoy here, and if you have like any like, I don't know, younger like alt teens or tweens, I feel like this is maybe a bit underrated now because it's so old, but I feel like a younger family member or something might really like this. I know that like tiny tween me probably would have really liked this, so I can appreciate it for what it is. However, personal enjoyment level, almost non-existent. This was kind of like my wrap up to like a fairly mediocre reading month. In terms of enjoyment, it was not the best. I feel like at this point I have also completely forgotten to keep updating on my dragon. So having read all of these books, the next thing that I needed to decide for my dragon for the readathon was the dragon's size. And initially, like, I was just assuming you just went with like the longest book, because I could have put any of like the dragon sizes, because I've read teeny books and I've read long books, and Iron Flame is like over 600 pages, but that would have given me like a gargantuan, like 60-meter tall dragon, and so I thought that's a little bit big, a little bit OP. Maybe I'm gonna like scale it back, like maybe for the future my dragon can grow, but like I want room to grow, right? So I decided to go with Sorcery of Thorns for my dragon size. This book is just over 450 pages long, which makes my dragon basically as big as like a 2-story house. I then had to decide whether my dragon was covered in feathers or scales. I think feathers were for non-fiction and scales were for fiction books. I read primarily fiction books. I could have chosen either, but I've read primarily fiction, so my dragon is going to be covered in beautiful iridescent scales. In terms of gender, now it does say that if you read an odd number of pages, then you have a male dragon, or if you read a book with an equal number of pages, you have a female dragon, but you can pick both or neither or whatever. And honestly, who am I to question the gender of a dragon? So like, I don't get one vibe either way when I think of like a dragon or my dragon in particular, so I'm just gonna have like an agender, gender neutral, gender non-conforming dragon. And then the last step was optional, and to be fair I think both of these are optional, but this was about like your dragon's personality, and it was determined by like the rating that you gave your books, and I definitely picked the wrong month for this, because so many of these were like low ratings. Now I think mostly I was giving like around about a 3 stars, but I did get a 4-star book. So 3 stars is a dragon that's like calm, relaxed, but maybe like easily confused, and 4 stars is a dragon that's like playful and friendly, trusting. So I'm assuming maybe my dragon is like somewhere in between. This says it's how it behaves like towards you, not necessarily other people. So I guess my dragon is mostly like calm and relaxed, but like also, you know, trusting, friendly. Like I have a good-natured dragon, you know? No evil dragons here. And I know I did start sketching a dragon, but like I'm so bad at art right now, guys. So whether or not I actually finish like making a dragon picture, if I do, I'll put it in here. But yeah, this is my rendition of my Readathon dragon. So with that, that brings my little wrap up here to a close. I think I am really impressed by the amount that I read this month, and I don't know how I did it. I really don't. So for me, December is just going to be chill, relaxed mood reading. There are like 2 books that I want to read in December, and you know, just take it easy, just have a good time. So for the most part, this kind of wraps up like the majority of pretty much all of my 2023 reading, apart from like the 1 or 2, maybe 3 books that I end up reading next month. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed this video, found it entertaining, found it useful, and hopefully I've like recommended some good books to you. Definitely the highlight of my month was Every Sky a Grave, and definitely the low point, easily Iron Flame. So if you enjoyed this, please leave me a little dragon emoji, seeing as I've talked a lot about dragons today. And I guess the question I'll ask is like, you know, first of all, whether you're taking part in this readathon or not, what do you think of my dragon? Like, do you think I made good choices? How are we feeling? Does anybody want to suggest a name for my dragon? That would be fun. Otherwise, have you guys read any of these books, or are you meaning to? Hopefully I haven't put you off any of them. And with that said, thank you guys so much for watching. That has been it from me, but hopefully I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!